Just wanted to say a few words ahead of this video because these videos come off the back of a huge lot of Eaglemoss Star Trek ships that I picked up recently. And so I've put up all the duplicates on eBay for you to have a look at, and I'll include links around and about the place. So if you've got any sort of interest in getting hold of a few of these to have a look at them for yourself, you can do so for a while at least, because it looks like they're not going to go flying off the shelves. I've tried to price them quite reasonably, so do please go and have a look. And without further ado, I will get on with the main video. Cheers. Now, I quite like Star Trek Into Darkness, which is the 2013 film in the Kelvin timeline. But this ship is just plain odd. And quite frankly, I don't think it should be in a Starships collection. The reason being, it's immediately described in this very magazine as not a starship. so let's explore this one a little bit, because in the first instance, it's calling itself a D4 bird of prey. Now, if you're familiar with Star Trek ship nomenclature, the Klingon battle cruisers, the big boys, are generally given a D designation. So D5s, D7s, most well known perhaps of them. And the D4, I believe, was designed for Enterprise but never shown on screen. And yet here we have a D4 bird of prey, which is 25.5 metres long with a wingspan of 39 metres. It's tiny. It is smaller than the Klingon Beryl-class Scout, which we see in, for example, Star Trek 4, Star Trek 3. So it just isn't a starship. It has no warp drive. It's designed only to operate in an atmosphere. It is described in this magazine as a fighter. So it is not in any way, shape or form a starship. I don't know if it can even make orbit worth a damn, quite frankly. So it's a very, very odd one to be including in this series, apart from the fact it's a ship that appeared in a Star Trek film. And so they wanted to do a model of it. And I get that, and it's Klingon, so yeah, absolutely, why wouldn't you? But the fascinating thing about this is that when you read this magazine and you look at all the design iterations it went through, none of them really look like a traditional Klingon ship until the final one they went with. And even then, I'm getting a lot of different design vibes off it that aren't very Klingon bird of prey-esque. So we can see here it has disruptor cannons, it has micro torpedoes, but it is an atmospheric fighter for planetary defence. It's got a crew of 6, it came into operation in 2259, so that's 100 years after Enterprise first encounters a bird of prey that is substantially more capable and larger and indeed operates in space as compared with this one. So it's very curious as a sort of design option, but obviously this is the Kelvin universe we're talking about. And, when I saw it in Into Darkness, it's moving around so much that I'm not even sure I got a massive impression of what it actually looked like, somewhat ironically given the amount of design effort that went into it. But basically, I would describe it as a fighter come dropship, albeit apparently it can only drop 4 Klingons out of its hull, because that was a bit of a late addition to the concept. And it has these sort of massively variable geometry wings, which are intended to allow it to be very, very manoeuvrable in atmosphere and to reconfigure for landing. So in that respect, it inherits a little bit from the traditional small bird of prey, but that's really about as far as it goes. It doesn't have a sort of a long neck. It doesn't have warp drive. None of those options. And you can see here the sheer variety of different sort of design iterations that it went through. All sorts of really sort of esoterical sort of looking stuff. I mean, that's vaguely Klingon bird of prey-esque. They almost look sort of anime-esque, some of these. That looks more like the scimitar from Star Trek Nemesis. They also went for some interesting asymmetrical designs, because I think they were just sort of trying stuff out. So they had these sort of weapons that were kind of perhaps formed from a wing or were just, on one side of the ship, because you could kind of do that. And obviously, they were sort of doing all this sort of they're also doing this sort of CG kit bashing idea. But apparently the guy who was coming up with these really sort of wacky ideas here that just look random and bizarre, sort of to my mind anyway, he actually left, and then someone else came in. And he was apparently one of the last men standing. So what happened was that, as with the previous film, they came up with the idea in the internal visual effects department. Then it got outsourced to another studio, who then sort of went to town on it and really got it ready for actual filming. So it was Klein's first designs. Yeah, it was Klein who did the sort of the final design of it, but just a whole load of stuff. Now, this one I've seen in a video. I think it's on YouTube. This was a guy called Pierre Drolet, who had done some work on Voyager and Enterprise beforehand. And so there's a video of his, which you never see in the film, but he came up with this idea of a sort of a slightly earlier perhaps bird of prey, or just an alternate universe bird of prey, because of course there was a bird of prey in Kirk's time, but it looked more like this. And the other strange thing about this was that apparently they were designing it around a sort of a lighting rig effect that was going to be used on the ground. So it was they were doing the whole thing in reverse. They didn't get told what the ship was going to be used for. They just said the ship has to be able to emit these lights for targeting or something, which is really odd way of doing it. But apparently this is just the sort of the J.J. Abrams sort of playbook for coming up with stuff. Now, what we then end up with is this beastie, and with a very, very sort of variable geometry wings effect. And this reminds me quite a lot of, a couple of things. It reminds me a little bit of the Betty from Alien. Now I want to say it's Alien Resurrection. I can't even remember which number of the film it is. Alien 4 maybe. A little bit of that. A little bit of a Cylon Raider from the reimagined Battlestar Galactica somehow as well. So just got that almost sort of kind of organic-y metallic feel to it, quite a burnished metal feel. So it's got that sort of feel to it as well. But the other thing it also reminds me of, and this is showing my age here, but if you remember Buck Rogers in the 25th century, there's a guy in that series called Hawk who had a spaceship that was like a hawk. Yeah, I know, shocker. But actually, this does slightly remind me of that, because one of the concepts they were sort of bandying about for this was the idea of a sparrow, which was Kirk's little borrowed ship, being chased down by a hawk. So that, for me, I kind of get that. A hawk as a bird of prey, generically, is a nice idea. So, the wings were massively geometrically variable. So hover mode, landing position, sort of high speed, all this sort of good stuff. It's been a while since I watched the sequence, but I remember that there was this sort of chase down sequence in the film, where Kirk's little sort of craft is basically completely outmatched by these guys, and they're in real trouble. And then, of course, Khan comes in to save the day in full-on raging Cumberbatch mode. He really frightened me in that movie. It's a terrifying performance, but very, very convincing. So they just came up with, and this is where the external visual effects house. Pixomondo went to town on it and designed all the engines properly, and sort of how the lighting was really going to work for it. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a really interesting model to look at, because they obviously they would have had a lot to go at with the model, because the final design was very, very detailed. The thing that will be a shame is that it won't move, because this thing's wings were intended to be very, very functional and full on, and shift about and reconfigure, even be asymmetric and sort of not work together at times if it was in trouble. And it was supposed to have sort of various sort of defense systems and so on, which apparently they pinched off the US Navy or similar originally. So when the effects house realised that at the last minute, they had to rejig all the weapon systems on it, because it looked too real world and not futuristic enough. So this picture on the back here is actually one of the most interesting ones from my point of view, because you can really see that sort of hawk shape there on the wings, but you can also see all the sort of little areas where it can articulate and look a bit different, and this sort of slightly sort of almost like a reptilian tail to it. So it's it's a really, really interesting shape overall when all's said and done, but it's just not. It's not my bird of prey, you know. It may not be yours either, of course, if you're of a certain age, which you might be because you're watching this video in the first place. I don't know, but let's have a look at it. So it's a very sort of. It looks a little bit lackluster on the box itself. So, but I think that the actual model is probably going to be a lot more impressive. He says optimistically. Let's have a look. A bit of perspex. Yeah, interesting. So immediately I'm picking up on a lot of sort of detailing and sort of, the sort of artwork, if you like, on the wings. A lot of markings on the wings. I'm also considering a little bit. It's a classic Eaglemoss, this, because I'm looking at it very cautiously because of all these little protrusions here. All of which are going to be breaky as all heck. So what I'm going to do is lift it very carefully from the wings, he says, and sort of lift it straight up and out. Whoa, that is shockingly light for an Eaglemoss model. Oh, I'm saying it's not that light, in fairness, actually. So let's have a look at it in isolation. So I mean, it's a good size. It's a really good sort of overall kind of width. You can see the sort of detail level that's on there, but that it's got some terrifyingly small aerials and stuff on the nose there, as you can see, and that is the classic problem with Klingon ships of apparently any era or timeline with it, and Eaglemoss, is that they can't do anything but make them tiny thin bits of plastic. I mean, look at this, things like this strut here. That's just so breaky. You've got to be so careful with these. I mean, just one false drop and it is going to lose a lot of its detail, and it's probably going to be a stone throw to try and fix it. I mean, I've fixed disruptors back onto birds of prey before now, but it isn't exactly my favourite thing to do in the world ever. It has to be said, but there is a huge amount of detailing going on there that you can probably see there. I think the Klingons themselves were supposed to drop out from. I can't quite see where the hatches are. There were supposed to be two hatches that allowed two pairs of Klingons to drop out, but they were saying that the way in which the ship was designed is so tight that they literally wouldn't have had anywhere to go on the ship. There were no sort of quarters or anything. It was just literally room enough to carry them and drop them, and that was kind of the lot. So I'm hoping that I can just sort of lay it down like that whilst I sort it stand out. Yeah, that kind of works. But can you see what I mean about the sort of Battlestar Galactica kind of vibes? It's got that sort of feel to it somehow. I guess because Cylon Raiders are very sort of two-dimensional, even in the reimagined version. So it's quite a sort of similar design schematic, which for an aircraft isn't unreasonable, because you want to present a fairly slim silhouette if you can at all, of course. And my light would decide to drop out at that particular point in time, wouldn't it? I'm completely guessing that that's the right place to put that stand. Let's just do my backup light there. So there we go. So I mean, it sits very, very nicely on its stand. I mean, it's nice and stable. There's definitely no way that's going to come off, unless you do something remarkably stupid to it. Let me just up my brightness a little bit so you can actually see it. Let me bring it forward a little bit. She is big. She's quite sort of wide to go on a shelf, but that's probably no bad thing, because you're not going to miss it. So it's the sort of thing. I don't think we really saw this on screen for terribly long at all when all was said and done. but nevertheless, I think it's it's an impressively detailed piece. I mean, you can see the weapons on here actually on the front there, on the top surface. Let me just risk this. Can you see that they're sort of standing out quite proud on top? I think those are the sort of the anti-projectile sort of weapons that they swapped out at the last minute. I think it's probably those. But it's an impressive ship. I will give them that. I think the level of detailing on there is what I would expect, obviously, from a sort of a modern CGI-driven film. And because they ended up like this, although it's not what I would see as a sort of traditional style of Klingon ship, nonetheless, there's enough of a wing idea there to give it to give you the feel of a Klingon ship, and the coloration is sort of more or less there. Even the wing detailing is kind of there as well. So it's a fair dues to them. I think they probably pulled it out of the bag, but it sounds like they really went through the mill trying to figure out how to design this in a sensible way for a sort of a more modern audience, But fair dues to them. I think they've pulled it off. So it's kind of grown on me. The more I've looked at it, and the more I've sort of described it and talked about it, I think the more sort of I've grown interested in it. But at the end of the day, it is only a fighter, so it's really not that big scaling wise. So in that sense, I'm still not sure it qualifies as a starship, guys, but it is what it is. So on that bombshell, I will leave it there. Cheers for now.